Welcome back. Let's start to time and synchronize between all the animation scenes we created. First, let's move this layer forward in time to integrate it with the other animations we've created. Let's turn on the other layers. And so we can see what we're doing, let's turn on the transparent background. As you can see, we'll need to synchronize the animation of the letter A with the animation of the other letters. But before that, I want to show you how to organize the compositions we have in the scene. I'll show you what I mean. First thing first, let's turn off this precomp for now. And now, let's talk about this composition that we have in the scene, and learn how we can resize the dimension of this precomp. Because right now, if I move the precomp here, we can see that the boundaries of this precomp are the same as the size of our main composition. In other words, we have a lot of empty space that we don't really need. I don't want it to be so large. This means that we need to crop the unnecessary space that we have in this precomp. In order to do this, we need to enter it. And as you can see, we got all this empty and unnecessary space here. To get rid of it, we need to access the settings of this composition. For that, press the shortcut Ctrl-K. Now we can see the settings of this composition. We can now decrease its width. Let's try to find a good size for the width. Let's set it to 600. We can also reduce its height. Let's set it to 600 as well. Once done, click OK. Now, let's go back to our main composition, and we can see that the boundaries of this composition have now become smaller. And now, let's do the same for this precomp as well. So, the first thing we need to do is to enter the precomp. Now, press Ctrl-K, and change the dimensions to 600 by 600 here as well. Hit OK, and return to the main composition. And now, let's animate the letter A, and synchronize it with the animation of the letters. But first, let's animate the size of this precomp. At this point in time, at the 4-second mark, when the letter is fully in frame, let's press S and create the first keyframe with the current value. Now, let's move to the 6-second mark, and scale it down to 50. After that, let's select all the keyframes and press F9 to ease them. Then, hold down the Alt key, double-click on one of the keyframes, and change the velocity to 85 by 85. Great! The next thing we should do is to find the right moment in the timeline to start the animation of the other letters. So let's turn on this precomp. And now, I see that we need to animate the position of the letter precomp to match the position of the letters. But before that, we can adjust the size of the text precomp, because there is a lot of empty space in it. We will do it, just like we did with the other precomps. So let's do this quickly. Let's get inside it. And first, we can close the layers. Alright, and now press Ctrl-K, change the dimensions to fit the animation happening here. I think 1200 in width should work. And for the height, we can try 600. Maybe 300. That's better. Press OK, and return to the main composition. Now, let's go to the point in time when the letters finish their animation to see their final position. And now we need to adjust the text precomp and the letter precomp's position, because right now, they're not centered in the scene, and that looks weird. So, let's go to second 8, where the text finishes its animation. And now, let's try to find a good place for it in the scene. You can bring it down a bit. And now, let's time the animation of the letter A to the position of the other letters. So when the letter A finishes the scale animation, at second 6, let's create an animation for the position property, and move it to the left. Press P to see the position property. And now, we'll create a keyframe at this time with the current value, because up to this point, we want this precomp to stay where it is currently located. Now, let's move to the second number 8, and move it to the left while holding down the Shift key. Let's position it here. And we'll move this precomp here, so that this whole scene is in the center of the composition. We can move this precomp a bit to the right. Once done, select all the keyframes and press F9. Then, hold down the Alt key and double-click one of the keyframes to change the velocity to 85 by 85. Now, As you can see, the letters currently appear above the letter A. This means that the letters are where they're supposed to be at the end, but they weren't in the best starting position. So let's enter the text precomp and adjust their initial position. To see the position keyframes for all the layers, we need to select them and press P. Then, to change the starting keyframes, we must be right on them with the time indicator. Otherwise, if we move the letters around without standing on them, the animation will get messed up, since we'll create new keyframes. So, it's super important to stand on the right keyframes when we're changing them. To do that, we can hold Shift while moving the time indicator. This way, it will snap to the nearest keyframe. Okay, now let's change the position of the letters in these keyframes. Let's move all the layers to the right, using the right arrow key on the keyboard. Hold down the Shift key, so that the layers move in larger increments. Let's go back to the main composition and see how it looks. I think I moved them too much to the right. I'll go back to the composition and move them a bit to the left this time. Let's see how it looks now. It's already better. And now, we can move the time indicator to see the timing between these two precomps. I think the text should start to move after the letter moves. This means we need to move the text precomp a bit farther in time. Let's see that once again. In my opinion, it's excellent. But now I notice that the revealing animation of the text is happening too fast. Let's go into the composition of the letters and fix this. To do that, we need to find the keyframes of the effect we have on the layers. So first, we need to display all the keyframes of all the layers. To do this, let's select all the layers and press U. Now let's enlarge this panel. Here, we see the stroke effect and the two parameters we adjusted in this effect. Now, in order to slow down the animation that triggers this effect, we need to extend the duration of this animation. In other words, let's select the last keyframes of the effect and move them further forward in time. Let's place them at second number 4. Great! Now let's extend the animation for the reveal of all the layers. To do this, let's select the keyframes of the stroke effect in this layer. Hold down the Shift key and select the rest of the keyframes of the effect in the other layers. Now, let's drag these keyframes while holding the Shift key. This way, they will snap to the keyframes located at 4 seconds. Let's see how it looks now. I think it's much better. Okay, now let's close all the layers. To do that, we need to make sure we're not selecting any layer. You can click here or here. And now press the U key. Let's shrink the composition panel a bit. Now let's create an offset between the layers. In other words, let's make the letters appear one after the other, with a slight delay. Currently, they all appear at the same time. So let's select all the letters, except for the letter T, and move them 3 frames forward in time. Now, to unselect this layer, hold the Control key and click on it once. Great, now let's move these layers 3 frames forward in time. Now, hold the Control key and click on this layer once, to unselect it. And now, let's move these layers 3 frames forward in time as well. Let's do this again, and see how it looks now. I think we can increase the offset we created a bit. So, let's select these layers again and move them 2 more frames forward in time. Now, let's move only these layers 2 more frames forward. Let's do this for all layers up to the last one. Let's see how it looks now. I think it's better. Now, let's go back to the main composition and see how it looks with the letter A. Looks nice. And now, let's learn how to shorten the duration of the precomps we have in the scene. I'll explain what I mean. As you can see, the duration of this composition is very long. But if we enter it, we can see that the animation inside this precomp ends at second number 3. In other words, this whole section is really unnecessary because nothing is happening here. So, we can shorten the length of this composition up to the point where the animation ends. And in order to see where the animation ends, we need to see where the last keyframes are in these layers. Question: what is the shortcut key to view the keyframes on the layers? In order to see all the keyframes of all the layers, we'll make sure that no layer is selected, and then press the U key. Now we can see that the last keyframes are here, meaning the animation ends at this point in time. So let's stand here with the time indicator. Now, we need to trim the timeline or the work area to the position of the time indicator. We can do this manually like this, or use a shortcut by pressing in. Now, to cut it, we need to right-click on the work area and select Trim Comp to Work Area. Great! Now the length of this composition is 4 seconds. When we go back to the main composition, it seems that the length of this precomp has indeed been shortened. We don't need to cut this precomp, because we need to see the letter A until the end of the animation. The same goes for this precomp. Okay, now before we move on, let's zoom out on the timeline, and press Ctrl S, to save everything we've done so far. Now I want us to discuss a very important topic, which is how to modify the animation we've already created, in other words, how to change keyframes. And we will do that in the next part. It's going to be a super interesting lesson. But before you dive into the next lesson, I highly recommend that you take a 10-minute break. Get up from your chair, do some light stretching, and drink a glass of water. This will help you to recharge your brain for the next lesson,